Okay, we can go ahead and start. Have you all came? So last my last session, did a presentation on George Jackson and the Soledad Brothers and just his story. I think his story is very important and impactful, and I really enjoyed studying and sharing it with you all. And so I just wanted to continue on his story into our next session, and I'm doing that. I did that by having you guys read three of his letters, short letters that he wrote while he was in prison, and also watch two short documentary films that I found on YouTube to watch. And yeah, I hope y'all really enjoy reading those and watching those films. So I'm going to start off with the first letter that I had you all read. He wrote it to his father on March 30th, 1965. And one thing that I got from the letter that really stood out to me and was very important, he stated that though I know I am a victim of social injustice and economic pressure, and though I understand the forces that work to drive so many of our kind to places like this, into mental institutions, I can't help but know that I proceeded wrong somewhere. I thought that was very important. I've never really heard anyone pinpoint things that kind of lead up to so many black women, men, and children going to prison. Is always so critical of their actions and what they did to go to prison, but not pinpoint the sources that drove to lead these people into prison, such as the things he pointed out as social injustice and economic pressure. He knew that he made bad decisions in his past. He also understood that his place in prison wasn't solely based on just his actions. There were other things driving him to that condition. So my question for you all is, what other obstacles or pressures are there in America that you think are not considered when negative stereotypes about Black men, women, and children disproportionately going to prison are brought up? And I can put that in the chat too, because that was a long question. Anybody?
Yeah, I'll kind of start. So similar to I just wanted to make one remark on what you assigned us, because I really did appreciate the clarity and writing of it, and similar to earlier today, Leslie's presentation was on writings by Angela Davis. And it was just something about the actual writing style and the way of conveying ideals that I thought was very, what you're talking about, clearly laying out some of these points that I thought was really important here. And I also think that to your question about the negative stereotypes, I think a lot about specifically how the laws themselves have been changed over time, and tweaked and expanded and moved to effectively catch more people of color. And sometimes it even looks when you're looking at the history of certain laws, you're looking at it and you're did they literally just change this so that they could get more people? It looks like that's just the whole reason why some of these things are put into place. And my own research is looking at laws, but in a very different way. I look at anti-pornography laws and things like that. And it's very interesting to see the moral arguments that go on within these laws. But those moral arguments are products of their time. And so if a law is created in 1934 and the way it's worded in 1934 has been disproportionately affecting certain communities, that type of thing is what I think is very through the decades and through the years, I feel what we don't really think about often is how the actual law of the land is representative of the historical moments that it was made in, and how most of the history of the United States is racist, and therefore the majority of these laws are inherently rooted in some type of bias. And I think most people, when it comes to stereotypes about criminality and Blackness, they go with criminality equals Blackness rather than questioning what criminality means. And I think that like that was something I was definitely getting from like what you were pointing out in that letter, being like, no, this ain't just all me. I can take responsibility for what I did and also say that there's something wrong with the system that would punish me for doing this in this way. And you know, like I think about that age old question of like, if someone steals bread to like feed their family, like does jail actually do anything? You know what I mean? Like what wrong has it really righted? So yeah.
Yes, I agree with all of that you said. I think it's important that we like notice like how these laws are changing and like how over time and like you said, what goes on at the time in our history changed, and a lot of these laws kind of like reform in a way. Like, can't really explain. I agree with what you said. Like the laws reform to fit what's going on and like how to constantly like vilify so many poor Black people and women and children. Is there anybody else who wanted to talk about that? Also, you can like share what you got out of the letter, like similar to what Ilana did, or anything that you thought was interesting.
So we're answering your first question, right? Still?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something that I don't always think is talked about is kind of like the culture surrounding Black people in general. I think that a lot of times we're looked at through the lens of white people and how white people choose to handle things, how white people have always chosen to handle things, instead of looking at it as Black people and white people having different cultures. And having different perspectives about things and having different ways of handling things. And so I think that that's something that is so important to look at as well whenever we're looking at especially young Black men going to prison, or young Black men entering the justice system and what that looks like before they got into that space. And I was talking to a police officer today kind of about that and how a lot of things that like white people wouldn't go to jail for at a young age or go to juvenile for at a young age, Black kids do. And so I think just kind of like looking at that is very important part of that.
I like that. That leads me to, sorry, I'd like to ask you another question, but that reminds me of like when people still try to believe that like reform is the way to go when dealing with like abolishing prisons and dealing with the police system. Kind of based around like the culture, you said, but many people think that bringing in like Black police officers or Black guards will like help shift the narrative and kind of like help things out. What we've seen that really doesn't work. So like, why do you think the culture really doesn't change when we do have these like Black police officers and guards and things like that?
You're asking me that question?
Yeah, anybody can answer that, but let's put you on blast.
I don't think it necessarily works because I think it's much like integration. And when you think about integration and what that looks like, that was Black people entering white society and having to follow laws of white society and having to meet the standards of white society. And so I think, you know, you can put Black cops or Black law enforcement in schools, you can put them, you know, in the community, you can put them wherever, but they still have to follow rules that white people would have to follow. They would have to follow rules that were made for and by white people. And so to me, it's like, if they want to keep their job, then that's what they have to do. So it really doesn't matter the fact that they're Black because it's still a system made for and by white people.
Thank you for that.
Going off of that, I think of like the Audre Lorde's master's tools won't dismantle the master's house a lot. Just what Essence was saying is that like this idea that we can fix the system from within as a solution is never going to work. Like it will, like Audre Lorde says, like it'll temporarily beat them at their own game, but changing the system requires dismantling what exists. And the solution is never to, the solution will never be like fully happen because just by putting Black people in positions that are not for them and not created by by them or by others. So yeah.
Yeah, I also think that so my father's in the military, and I think about basic training and like what they like drill into soldiers, which is very much so this idea of like they have their own culture, they have their own groupings, they are like a group in and of themselves. And I think my father was very lucky that like his incoming unit was most like the unit he came in with was mostly Black, so, and mostly Southern. So he didn't really have to do a lot of changing because his leadership was all Black, but most police departments do not have that type of leadership. And so you are forced to, like, if we want to talk about culture, you're forced to adopt the culture and identity of being a police officer. And that is meant to override everything else. And I think the training that they go through, I don't know if anybody saw, like when the first few protests were happening, people were talking about like the guy that goes around and he trains some police departments. And it's very us, them rhetoric. Like, even, you know what I mean? Even if they're patrolling the suburbs in the morning and like the quote unquote inner city at night, like the training they receive is like, everyone is a threat. Everyone wants, you know what I mean? And at the same time, their inner biases that assume that white suburban people don't commit crime as often makes them look at them as lesser of a threat, but the quote unquote inner city youth, or, you know, all these, like, that still gets a high threat level to them. And so it's like, yeah, I think that no, it'll never be solved by just having a few Black police officers in every department, because that's one, just not the way a culture is changed, let alone a political system. And I remember growing up and my mother telling me, like, honestly, like Black cops are the ones that like have been the worst, like have like, you know, the most tickets, the most harassing and whatnot. And I think it'd be interesting to like kind of ask like why that is, you know what I mean? And I wonder if it's kind of an overcompensation for that like position in the culture not being theirs to begin with and having to like prove it in a certain way.
I agree. They definitely have to prove it to show that they are going to follow the rules or keep their job. And what is his name? I think his name is like Chris Dormer. I don't know if any of you guys heard of him. He was a cop, I think early 2000s, mid 2000s. I don't know. I don't have my facts straight. But he decided to report on a white officer who was kicking a mental illness man, and he got fired. Like, there's no space for Black officers or any officers for that instance to help change it, because like you said, it's a culture that they're upholding. Like, if you don't do what they say, you're not going to be in it. So that's where I think the idea comes from. Like, there are no good cops, because if you were a good cop, you probably wouldn't be in it anyway, because you wouldn't have the ability to uphold the type of culture that they had. So I'm gonna move. Oh, you can go. You can go.
Yeah, no, I just have something real quick. The kind of caveat off of what Yolanda said, versus the concept of us versus them. And I think they also try to incorporate that with the Black people versus fellow Black people, and that's why, you know, you see those people in those positions. When you see, you understand, when you see a fellow African American as a police officer, both sides have two expectations, and that creates a precarious situation, because one is saying, as a Black police officer, you can understand what I'm going through, so you shouldn't adhere to the rules that you abide by. And then the Black police officer can assume that you know what I'm going through, and you know how I have to uphold my job. I'm just doing my job, all this. And so it's conflicting. And I feel like they've done that from the beginning. And by putting putting Black people in those positions and allowing, but it's, and again, it's just the lower positions, like everybody was saying. You know what I'm saying? You don't see a lot of captains, you don't see a lot of like high ranked officials. So when you're in those situations, you're forced to, you know what I'm saying, do your job. And that's why you see the Black people having all the high arrest rates, the pullover rates, and all of that. And George Jackson, I'm gonna read this real quick excerpt. He had something to kind of say about this. In his letter, in his first initial letter, he was like, our people react in different ways to this neo-slavery. Some just give in completely and join the other side. They join some Christian cult and cry out for integration. There are others who doubt themselves most. They are the weakest and hardest to reach with the new doctrine. And I feel like he was like speaking to those people that kind of conform to like the other side, is what he said. And it's difficult, and it grows like painstakingly difficult to help them come back to what our reality is, because then they're you know what I'm saying, they're conflicted on both sides of the spectrum. But yeah, that's kind of what I got from that.
Thank you for that. That actually led up to like my next point that I was gonna bring up. I was gonna have you guys, I was gonna read that exact same statement that Ogechi just read and ask you guys like, what were your thoughts about that? Like, if you agree, disagree. I'm gonna read it again, the same thing that Ogechi read, but I'm also gonna put it up and share it with you guys on the screen so you can also like read along to it. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out where to go to share my screen. Can everyone see it? Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and read it again, the same statement Ogechi did. Our people react in different ways to this neo-slavery. Some just give in completely and join the other side. They join some Christian cult and cry out for integration. These are the ones who doubt themselves most. They are the weakest and hardest to reach with the new doctrine. Some become better drinkers and narcotic users in an attempt to gain some mental solace for the physical depravity they suffer. I've heard them say, there's no hope without dope. Some hire on as a janitor, bellboy, red cap, cook, elevator boy, singer, boxer, baseball player, maybe a freak at some sideshow, and pretend that all is as well as possible. They think since it's always been this way, it must always remain this way. These are the fatalists. They serve and entertain and rationalize. So yeah, that was a lot. But I just wanted to ask y'all, like, what are your thoughts about this statement, if you agree or disagree?
What year was this one in again?
This was in 1965. So yeah, you kind of think about like what was going on around the time, like who you might be coming for, you know.
Yeah, like, because that line about they joined some Christian cult and cry out for integration, it struck me because I was wondering if he was talking about like SCLC, or like some of the bigger groups like within like the civil rights movement that were Christianity based and pushing for integration and like the end of like segregation as we know it, which would have been a very interesting, I think, like perspective from like that time period. And I don't know, like for that to be sandwiched between like those who give in completely and join the other side. And I'm wondering if he viewed those that give in completely and join the other side as very different from the janitor, bellboy, red cap, cook, elevator boy, singer, boxer, those. Yeah, I'm interested to hear what everyone else thinks.
Well, I'll just add while y'all thinking your thoughts. That is a very interesting point, like wondering if he is viewing these people as the same. Because like, I think that it's some sort of like idea that all Black people have to, or they're obligated to become activists based on like the position that we're in and like the things that we are constantly fighting for. Like there are some just regular day-to-day Black people who don't actually constantly speak out about things that they go through, and in a lot of, like, George Jackson, he, to me, it feels like in this letter that he's saying that it's every single Black person's duty, whether you are a gender bill, but like you still have to fight oppression. And I just wonder, like, why y'all thinking, if I went to answer, like, what do y'all feel about, how do y'all feel about that? Do you think every Black person is obligated to become that activist just because they're Black? Because like every white person are not seen as obligated to fight for the same things that they've been implementing. So why does it seem like Black people have to have that sort of position?
I don't think Black people should have to, when it comes to issues of racism, I don't think Black people should even be doing like, the reality is we have to do it because other people don't do it. And at the same time, it's not our job because we didn't create it and we didn't create the systems that perpetuate it. So really it's not our job to do it. Like, it literally should be white people fighting against it because their ancestors created it. They're in the systems that continue to perpetuate it, because I think, and I hate to say this, as much activism as we do, like, we can keep fighting and keep doing this and keep doing that, but like, we literally can't dismantle something that we did not build. Like, we don't have access to that. We can sit in a system and do it. We can be out protesting, but like, we don't have access to these systems the way white people have access to them.
So oh, nope, not me. I got you. No. Come back.
I think when I look at this and I read the myriad of jobs, that's a lot of jobs. And they're all different. And the one that really struck out to me was baseball player, because that's more of an individualistic type job. Like, you know what I'm saying? You go do your job, you go home, get paid. I mean, you have a coach or whatever. So you it begs the question, what are they doing for them to end up on the list? And the first thing that came to mind for me was my favorite team is the Los Angeles Clippers. And
You're muted. Okay.
You muted yourself.
Whoa, how long?
Oh, maybe like
It was a
10
while.
seconds, yeah.
That's unfortunate.
We
All right,
heard Los Angeles Clippers, and then
okay. Los Angeles Clippers, my favorite team. We had a racist owner. His name was Donald Sterling a couple years ago. And many people always say, like, if you work with Black people, there's no way you can be racist. There's no way that you can be racist because there's Black people in the vicinity. He sees them every day. They're his players. And I think it's because he considered them like some type of a different, like a form of slavery. Like, he owned them because he paid them. And I think that also speaks to like kind of the perspectives on the other side. So maybe these jobs, not all the people in these jobs know that they are necessarily conforming to whatever George Jackson is saying, but because they're in those positions, that's what the outside perspective can look like they're doing. You know what I'm saying? Because like you said, Black people just living their day-to-day lives. The bellboy might just be doing his job. You know what I'm saying? But then his owner is racist. So it looks like he's conforming to that.
Yeah, I think that last line like really speaks to what you were just saying. Like, they serve and entertain and rationalize. You know what I mean? And it's this idea that like, oh, I'm assuming the baseball players and boxer too and singer are included in there because it's this idea that like, oh, you're entertaining exclusively white folks, you know? And I don't know, I absolutely agree with Quiescence. Like, first and foremost, I do not believe that all Black people like have to be a certain form of activist, a certain very visible, hyper visible form of activist. honestly, like, I remember having a discussion with my mother and some friends and being like, especially for me as a Black woman, I feel like one of the most revolutionary things I can do is live and live well. And, you know, find love and happiness how I see fit, because like historically this country has not allowed people that look like me to do that. You know what I mean? And I even see that like just getting up in the morning as like a form of activism, because this country often wouldn't care if I did or didn't. Probably still don't. And so I think there is something, especially since you're saying you said this is from the first letter, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I like there might be a little bit of resentment and maybe some like hurt feelings, you know, going on here. Not to trivialize it, but like in a way that it's like, if you are either newly incarcerated or newly reaching out from long-term incarceration, like what must it look like to look at the rest of the world and the janitor, the bellboy, the cook, the singer, the boxer, the baseball player, and see that some of them look like you, but feel like they aren't where you are because they're willing to serve and entertain white people. And so like I get to a certain extent the call here and the mention here, but I do think that my personal politics say that like that janitor, bellboy, singer, boxer, baseball player might have kids and need to put food on the table, and that kind of overrides some type of long-standing idea of people just always want Black people to be working and doing something and have something to show for it every day, even when it's activism and fighting racism. And I'm like, you know what? Like, if I got to get food on the table for me and kids, me and whoever, like that is my activism of the day. You know what I mean? And so I think that he might have been kind of missing that on a certain level. But I also do want to point out like my privilege in being able to say that. I just want to say that as well.
I also have another statement, like he said, like literally right after the first one, and then he like kind of did like switch like the role of the neo-slave. He said, "Then there are those who resist and rebel, but do not know what, who, why, or how exactly they should go about this. They are aware but confused. They are the least fortunate, for they end where I have ended, by using half measures and failing dismally to affect any real improvement in their condition. They fall victim to the full fury and might of the system's repressive agencies. Believe me, every dirty trick of deception and brutality is employed without shame, without honor, without humanity, without reservation, to either convert or destroy a rebellious arm." That was a lot. How do you all like feel about this statement in comparison like to the last statement? Some point out he kind of related this to himself, like where his condition, where he is now. Any thoughts?
I kind of want to like stick to what I said before on that, like kind of like frustration and resentment, that because it's, to me it's very clear from these words that he feels like when he says they are the least fortunate, for they end where I have ended. And I'm not sure if he feels that he is one of them. There's like a weird separation in that sentence. You know what I mean? So like they are the least fortunate instead of we, you know what I mean? And things like that. But at the same time, he's speaking to the experiences that end that way so personally that it makes me feel that he might see himself in these people that he's talking about, and in this idea of resisting and rebelling, which obviously he sees as like a good calling, quote unquote, but that there is general confusion about how to do that effectively. And so I don't know. I think that there's definitely something here that ends with him being the purposeful rebel and resistor, but just not having like adequate tools to do it with and ending up where he is.
That kind of like reminds me of like what Kieson said about like how it's hard for us to like fight these systems because we're not the ones who created. We don't really, not that we don't understand how they were built up, but just we weren't the ones who created. We didn't have the mindset that they did when they were building these systems. So it's almost, it's kind of like, it doesn't make me lose hope, but it's just like, what do we do? Like, what can we continue to do to like change these systems? I'm gonna move on. If no, oh, you can go, Kirsten. Sorry.
I feel like reading statement number 2 and then listening to the comments or the responses and your response. I mean, I feel like when it's talking about how to rebel and how to like the who, like why are we doing this? Who are we doing this for? I think is so critical for Black people to talk about that, because I talk to so many different Black people and everyone has a different solution to dismantling these systems. And I think the reality of the situation is, 1, we can't do it. 2, we're trying to like there's like this table of oppression, and like we're working for white people to do something that white people have to do. So while we're trying to break down their side of the table, ours is still up because we have work to do. And so I think when it comes to being rebellious or effectively fighting this fight, I think that that is something that we have to focus on as our community before we focus on white people and racism.
All right. Yeah, maybe say something to that too. I mean, I think, yeah, speaking as someone who is, a white person, and I'm in conversation a lot with, with white people who are defending the system, and his statement there about the system's repressive agencies and, the full fury and might of those agencies. I wonder, I don't know. I mean, some of it might just be wishful thinking or hopeful thinking, but I wonder whether that fury and might is kind of in, it's at its last gasps kind of right now. I mean, I look at President Trump. I look at how old a lot of these people are. I look at the generational differences I see among among white people, and I look at kind of the extreme, defensiveness of these older generations of white folks, and the way that Trump is using, police power, and has just turned into an extreme version of some of these repressive agencies. And I kind of wonder, hopefully, whether with the change in demographics, with white Americans becoming a minority, which is going to happen at some point in the next 20, 30 years, I wonder if that, and the generational differences, I think younger generations of white folks not being as willing as the older generations are to use those repressive agencies and defend the system with this, with these dirty tricks and brutality. I just kind of wonder, hopefully, whether that will lead the way for some real, as he says, some real improvement in these things.
Yeah.
Can I say? Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, like, I think the problem really is that I don't think it's a demographic issue by itself, right? So the issue with the way that we look at systems, in my opinion, is that it's not an age thing. It's a lack of desire to understand, and a lack of desire to change, and the lack of personal responsibility in a lot of these systems. So I think, like, for someone who sees a lot of that, like, personally within the systems, and it's not just a white person issue, right? Just because that they're going to become not the minority. Non-Black people of color are a huge problem in this as well, right? They are part of these repressive agencies, and they use their positionality to continue a lot of this. And they create systems where, I mean, I'm just reading all of these statements, right? Where Black people feel like they have to debate on how to solve these problems that we have caused. So I think rethinking where that's coming from, and also thinking about, like, I don't think it's an age or demographic thing at all. I think now the issue is going to be people are going to appear, post like a black square on Instagram and, change cosmetically things, but not systemically, right? Fail to go and say, let's change the system. They'll have those conversations with their families, but fail to show up at that meeting or at that actual event or actually show up to that protest or actually show up in solidarity is what I'm thinking. But Kia, since if you have.
No, I agree with Aisha. And I also think like this idea that like white people are not the majority. White people haven't been the majority if you really think about white people. And like Aisha said, this is like a great point to that. Like, it's not at all about white people and how they perpetuate racism. Because if you look at it, white people would then be the minority if we're looking at people of color, and then white people would be the minority. And so it like literally doesn't matter how many you have of something if they hold more power, because laws are on their side, systems are on their side, institutions are on their side, society is on their side, media is on their side, then it's not going to matter how many black people there are, how many other people of color there are. And then on top of that, like, we have to look at anti-black racism. And so we can dismantle so many different things based on prejudice against people of color, but like black people still have to face a lot of anti-black racism. And that is why I think it's hard to even talk about like generations and things like that, because honestly, until the whole system institution is dismantled, like it's not going to matter. And then as far as age or generation, I don't really see a difference in age and generation, because I'm seeing things that they're done in a more modern way, but it's like the exact same thing. Like if we're looking at blackface and how that was done in the past and how it's done now, it's just people think it's more funny now, or not even more funny, but it's like it's on social media apps and it's so prevalent that it's not seen as big of an issue as it is. But to like have Mizzou have multiple incidents of blackface or reenactment of the murder of black people, that's very prevalent. So it's not really a generational thing, I feel.
Yeah, I wanted to, I really like what Kiescent said about making sure that we're talking about anti-Black racism and how that is categorically, like, that designation matters. You know what I mean? When we talk, like, the systems and structure of America are based on a Black-white binary, period. That's just how it's always been. And so when we say racism, oftentimes we're thinking anti-Black racism, but then so many other nationalities, cultural groups, ethnic groups come into the country and then find themselves like pushed up against this Black-white binary. And more often than not, especially if they are brown or Black, like pushed towards the Black part of the binary as basically as like racism functions against them. But we understand it functions in varying degrees and varying ways. And so it's one of those things where it's like, if we want to talk about how the master's tools cannot dismantle a master's house, like also if my roof is falling in, I can't really come over and help you with your water heater. There's a lot, going on, I think, in many different cultural groups that like, I feel like a part of me wants to put the focus on the system itself, because the system is what makes it possible for age and cultural group and religion and whatnot to almost not matter when it comes to anti-Black racism. The system is what makes it possible for anti-Black racism to be present in so many different communities that it did not exist in before those communities were like integrated into Americanness. And at the same time, there's this want to distance the system from people, because it's like, I can't have a conversation with white people about like systematic racism when I'm also kind of talking about how other people of color are practicing anti-Black racism at the same time. You know what I mean? Like, multiple houses, roofs falling in, what are we going to do? And I think that's kind of, I think this statement right here is speaking to some of that. Even though time-wise is like at its point in history, we're talking pre like the surge of different nationalities of African immigrants into the US and a few other things. But I think that this do not know what, who, why, or how, I think that who is really important here in this statement, because I think like he's definitely recognizing like, yeah, this is white people, but this is also some other stuff too. You know what I mean? Like, it's the same reason why just because you're Black doesn't mean you can't participate in other isms, ableism, sexism, you know, all of these other things. And so like, I don't know. I feel like it's difficult, and I don't know if there's a right way to approach it, but I do think that like making it clear in conversation, like when we're talking about anti-Black racism and when we're talking about racism as a whole, I think is something really important to do.
It was really good. I gave a lot of insight. I really appreciate that. There's anybody else who had anything to say before I kind of like switch?
I kind of had something to say, like in lines with what everyone else had said, just kind of about how, like, kind of the obstacles that we're facing in regards to, like, actually, like, abolishing these systems. One thing I think that he, like, touched on statement one was that, like, there are also Black people who, you know, may cosmetically seem like they're maybe for liberation, but in reality they are okay with, they're complacent rather with the system and playing in it because maybe they're benefiting in some way from it. And so we kind of talked about statement one a little bit, but from my perspective, I don't think he's really necessarily specifically like targeting those specific professions. More so, he was just kind of highlighting how certain people in these professions may, who are Black, who happen to be Black, might just actually like in some ways contribute. And so like I kind of think of, I think statement one is very like relevant. And I think it sounds like something someone may say today. And that's why it's kind of surprising that it was like written in the 60s, because when I think of the 60s, of course I wasn't born then, but when I think of the 60s, it's kind of like people were applauding just like physical representation or just seeing visual representation of seeing someone as, you know, a world-renowned boxer, seeing someone as a world-renowned singer, seeing people like in Hollywood, seeing Black people in Hollywood. So I just think it's very modern, and I kind of think about, it makes me think about like famous people or people in the spotlight, Black celebrities who are like so rich, who are so like affluent, and like, I don't know, it just makes you think of, you know, the critiques that they've been given, and, you know, why we're so, I think sometimes, I don't know, people are so defensive over them. Like I think of like Beyonce, and like I think Bell Hooks issued a critique on her, and it was valid, a lot of it. And I think a lot of critiques about Beyonce and like how like she's kind of this like representation of Black capitalism. But I feel like a lot of people see that and their like initial reaction is very defensive, and like, you know, even though they're not in that position, they're not a millionaire, billionaire, but yet they feel like they feel like that critique isn't valid, just because I think of the way that we've kind of conceptualized like and thought of like Black people and what that means to be successful as a Black person. But yeah, I just kind of thought that was a little bit relevant to what we were talking about.
Yeah, very relevant. It's definitely like a switch at how we see like Black celebrities today. We no longer think of them as that successful Black person that we want to be. Like we do, but we see how they oftentimes uphold the system that is definitely oppressing like more poor Black communities as well. And I like how you pointed out like it kind of reminded me of like celebrity culture. I don't know if like you guys seen things. People are starting to say like celebrity culture is dead. Like more people are calling out these celebrities on some like capitalism, like you said, and some people are catching on to it, and some people are still very defensive of like who they stand or their faves as well. So I really like that. That was a good point. I only have 10 minutes left. So I did have you guys watch the films. I'm not really gonna ask you guys much questions about that, but like if there's anything from the films that stood out to you or that that you found delighting or anything they want to share. No, I can just ask one more question.
I found something that kind of stood out to me was that they put, I think I knew this, but then they said it again multiple times in the video. So I was like, whoa, that they put Angela Davis on the top 10 FBI most wanted. I mean, like, if you honestly like sit down and say like top 10 people in this world on the list, that's crazy. I mean, those people are killing people. Those people are like, they are murdering people. I mean, that's not funny, but like those are dangerous people. But Angela Davis wasn't one of those people. So I mean, that stems from the fear that they had of Black uprising and Black intellect. All she was doing was speaking. She was a professor at UCLA. They said that she was teaching blasphemous things, trying to radicalize the students there or whatever. But she was just doing her job, and then she went to jail, got stemmed into other things, and I was just like highly appalled that she made the list. Like that's a decent list.
That was a lot. Try to vilify her and like defame her character just for standing up to the system. Anybody else want to?
I was thinking about one of the things that George Jackson's mother said in the interview, kind of related to what Agechi was saying. Like, she was asked, like, do you think George Jackson was violent, or some framing of that question? And I loved her answer. And I think, like, I really wish that I wish that answer was brought up more, because she goes, like, I wouldn't open, like a country that kills off Black people, goes to other countries and kills people in war. I wouldn't open my mouth about violence. They're going to say something. I wrote this down. They're going to say something to me about violence. I wouldn't talk about violence, which I thought was so powerful. Like, that she like completely shuts that question down with the fact that who is the violent force, right? And who's the true person or entity. Like, this country is a violent place, but once people who are marginalized speak up and decide that they're not going to take it, they're suddenly, the question is asked to them. No one asked the United States, do you think you're a violent country? No one says that, right? No one goes and asks Trump, do you think you're a violent person? So I just thought that was really powerful.
I agree. It's very interesting how they view the country's violence versus a Black person fighting against the system or standing up, and they see that as more violent than this country's really violent past. It's very interesting. And yeah. Anybody else who wanted to share? I'll go ahead and close out if nobody else has anything to say. Okay. Thank you guys so much for coming. This was a very, very great conversation. Y'all are so smart. But just to talk about a little bit about my next session, we will be discussing more about kind of like shying away from George Jackson's whole story and going more into the prison system as a whole, discussing the prison industrial complex, war on drugs, the 3-strike rule, stuff like that. And we'll be doing that by watching and discussing 13th, that had a lot of those topics in that film. So yeah, I'm just gonna watch that, and I'll send you guys the information as well as the dates for the next session. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you,
Great.
Andrea, so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea.
No problem.
I have to say too, I'm just so glad that you've got me reading George Jackson. You know, it's such an incredible writer. I mean, he's so smart, so clear. So you know, he's really reflecting on things in such intelligent ways that, you know, things that I just wish I had read it before. You know, and it says something about like the, you know, the kind of system that we're growing up in that I wasn't familiar with his writing at all until your sessions. And, you know, I grew up in Northern California too, and I didn't even know the story. So that's, I mean,
I really wish he was a more popular, like, activist that we talk about, like in the same way we do like Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. It just makes me think how powerful he could have been if he wasn't even in prison.
Yes. Yes, it's such a loss for, you know, for our society that he was in prison. I mean, it's such a loss. He could have been such a powerful leader. I think you're right. So yeah, I mean, yeah, anything we can do to make him more widely known and make this writing, you know, more widely known. I think I read it hasn't been reprinted in about 20 years or something. I mean, this should be reprinted, should be distributed more widely. People should know about him. And I mean, it's really powerful stuff. So yeah, thanks.
No problem. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you. It was great.